Today we're going to look at Revelation chapters 6 and 7. Chapters 6 and 7. And we're going to look at the 6 seals. So there's 7 seals, but we're going to look at the first 6 today as they're grouped together. And then the 7th seal begins something different that we'll look at next week. But we want to understand, I've been kind of emphasizing this, that you see passages about like destruction and turmoil and chaos, but then you see the Lamb on the throne, that kind of imagery and the victorious imagery. And no matter our understanding of Revelation, we ought to also understand that this life there might be turmoil everywhere, but the Lamb is still on the throne. And so the Lamb that we looked at, who is worthy in chapter 5, now begins to open the scroll. Remember, who is worthy? Who can open the scroll? And then the Lamb was worthy to do it. And so what follows is what I'm going to introduce as covenantal judgment that is deliberately shaped by the language and the imagery of the Old Testament. We're going to see the 4 horsemen. We're going to see martyrs. We're going to see cosmic shaking. We're going to see these things. And we're going to also understand that they're not new ideas. Remember, the key to understanding Revelation is not to look at it as a unique work all by itself, but to look at it as what it is, and it's an apocalyptic writing. And there's imagery. What's the number? I think I said it depends on how you read it, but up to 1,000 Old Testament references in the book of Revelation. Even if it's not a quotation, it's an allusion to something. For instance, the 4 horsemen, the first time you see them is not in Revelation. You see them in Zechariah. You see those 4 different colored horses way back in Zechariah, hundreds of years before John wrote this. So there's nothing new as far as that goes. It's just understanding the type of language that is used. Used all the way back with Moses and the prophets, that is brought, in a sense, to a termination or a climax or an ultimate point here in John's Revelation. So let's look first at the 4 horsemen that's in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And we're going to read through these just one step at a time. But the first 4 seals, they belong together because each one is introduced by one of the 4 living creatures that says, "Come." And we kind of saw last week that the living creatures, at least in one sense, represent all of creation. So creation here is crying out to these, to what comes from these seals. Creation itself is summoning this judgment. Again, this imagery is drawn from Zechariah 1 and Zechariah 6, where colored horses patrol the earth on behalf of God. So here they are agents of covenant curse. So let's see the white horse in verses 1 and 2. John writes, "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer." Now, there's a little bit of debate and discussion on who this is. Many will see this as Christ because you've got the conquering language, and you've also got the white horse. I don't think this is Christ. I think the white horse rider later is clearly Christ, but here it's hard to think that it would be Christ, the Lamb, opening the first seal and then Christ riding that first horse too. That seems a little harder to grapple with, but also Christ wears many crowns, and here he's given a crown if this is Christ, and he had a bow in his hand, where Christ later has a sword in his mouth. So it might be Christ. Either way, the imagery is the same. Either way, what's happening is the same because it's leading the way of judgment on God's people. So he came out conquering and to conquer, with the intention of conquering, and was going to be successful in the conquering. So this white horse represents conquest, and the systematic conquest of Galilee that began with General Cestus Gallus in AD 66 under the command of Emperor Nero, then under Vespasian and under Titus, what you see historically is a systematic conquest by Rome of Jerusalem and the whole Holy Land. Well, it's so neat how that some of these things we're seeing paralleled in our sermons through Mark right now. But in 66, when Jerusalem was initially advanced upon by Rome, Jerusalem held its own for a minute. In so much that Rome said, okay, we're going to have to bring out the big guns. But Rome fell back for a minute to regroup, and then there was no question. Nobody held Rome off anymore. Rome conquered all of Galilee. Jerusalem destroyed the temple, did all of this work. The second horse we see in verses 3 through 4 represent war. It's a red horse. Read with me with verses 3 and 4. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Remember, it's a thunderous voice, right? And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. So here, peace is taken from the whole earth. Men are slaying one another. We see this great sword. A sword is a weapon of death, right? It's not intended to wound someone. It's intended to kill someone. And so this is the violence of war, and it is specifically the kind of internal civil strife and conflict that characterized the period of the Jewish-Roman War and the chaos, specifically of the years 68 and 69, which was the year of the 4 emperors. Again, we're going to talk about some of this stuff in the sermon today, but General Titus, was it Titus? It was first Vespasian. Vespasian became emperor, and then Titus was the general under him. Saw what was happening in Jerusalem and called upon the name of God and said, "This is not us. This is not us doing this," because Jerusalem was making it easy for Rome, because they were literally killing each other and throwing the bodies over the wall outside of Jerusalem. Just from the Roman conquest of those, really, culminating in the year 70 AD, Josephus writes that just over, and it might be exaggeration, but just over 1 million people died in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, 1 million people. And just short of 100,000, this is probably much more accurate, but just short of 100,000 were carried off to Rome in captivity. But the historical accounts of the factions inside Jerusalem and the different zealot groups and different rebellion groups that were literally turning on each other and killing each other inside the walls of Jerusalem. That Rome eventually came in and killed a ton of people, but Jerusalem made it easy on them as peace was taken from them. Josephus says that the seditious factions dyed the holy house itself with their own blood. So there was blood of the Jews who were murdered by other Jews inside the temple because of what they were doing. The Idumeans massacred the high priest Annas, who we know from the time of Christ. They killed him. Josephus writes that the Romans could afford to wait because the Jews were doing the work of destruction themselves. So they were just kind of waiting it out. Next, we see the black horse in verses 5 and 6. And I'll pause again to say, we're seeing how all of this fits in the first century very clearly, very well. I'm not going to die on the hill that's going to say this, that there will be nothing like this in the future. That's not a hill I'm going to die on. But it does seem like it fits very well, and so that's what I'm going with. Next, we see where we at the verses 5 and 6. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." This is what we see at the gas pump times like 100. This was a quart of wheat, enough to eat and provide maybe for your family for a day, that cost a denarius, which was a day's wage. Imagine going to work and you're not just going to the gas pump and paying $5 a gallon. You can't afford whatever the gas is because just the cost of food is taking your whole day's paycheck. That was the situation here. And so this black horse is famine, a rider with scales, implying weighing out and rationing food and at inflated prices. A day's wage for a day's bread. Imagine whatever, a day's wage could be $100 or $200 or $300, depends on what somebody makes, right? Let's say you go buy a loaf of bread for $200. That's what they were looking at here. The instruction to leave the oil and the wine untouched, it might indicate that some who were wealthy were relatively insulated while the poor starved. There could have been people inside Jerusalem who were very wealthy and hoarded up the food and money that they had and kept themselves barricaded that lasted a little while. That could very well be the case. Like somebody today would have I have a friend. I know a guy who's got an underground bunker. He's got food that'll last something like 7 or 8 years. And, it could be something like that. But Josephus was a Jewish historian who survived. He was one of the survivors in Jerusalem. He was not a Christian, but he was a Jewish historian, and he survived the siege by hiding under dead bodies. So that's what kept him from dying when they were coming through, just killing everybody. He was hiding with dead bodies, pretending to be dead, and was later discovered and captured and taken to Rome and really rubbed shoulders with the emperor and became, it was about the year 75, he began writing the Antiquities, the history of the Jews, and then the history of the Jewish War, which we have. I've got a copy on my desk right now because I have all these quotations from it, right? But Josephus says that food was sold at astronomical prices inside the besieged city. So Rome is surrounding Jerusalem, so no food can come in. They only have the food that they have. And Rome's not helping them, giving them more food. This is the whole purpose of a besiegement. There's been hundreds of those in history where one military surrounds another city until they starve themselves to death, until they're able to breach the walls. And after they've weakened them, and most of them have died from starvation, they can then take the city. But people were searching sewers and dung heaps for scraps. And Josephus says a measure of wheat sold for a talent of silver. A silver coin, that weighed a talent, is how much wheat sold for. And people were dying in houses, clutching handfuls of grain, and others murdering family members over scraps of food. And he writes that the famine was more destructive than the sword. The famine itself was more destructive than the sword. We know of things like this from history, right? In Deuteronomy 28, 53 through 57, it specifically warns that the covenant-breaking Israelites would eat their own children during a siege. And Josephus tells of a horrifying account of Mary, a lady named Mary of Bethesda, who roasted and ate her infant son during the siege, and it disgusted the Romans who saw her do it. These Romans who got a kick out of crucifixion. They're just crucified. So another thing that happened here that we've not talked about is Josephus writes that there were no more trees. Again, probably exaggeration, but there were no more trees left in the land because of all the crucified bodies. They were cutting trees down, crucifying somebody, cutting a tree down, crucifying somebody. There were no more trees in that area because of that. But it was in so much that, as I said, Titus kind of looked at what was going on. A wicked guy, as far as we know, it's not Titus from the Bible. It's not Titus who was, Titus was just a popular name. This is a Roman guy named Titus. And he looked and thought, man, we've conquered, we've done some terrible things, but this is not us. He acknowledged that this was God judging these people. For one, if God is on their side, this is not going to happen, right? If God is on their side, this is not going to happen. The next, in verses 7 and 8, we see the pale horse. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. I said this early on. The Greek word for earth is the word gay, is how it's pronounced in Greek, and it means land or earth. Just it depends on the context. Many times it's referring specifically to the land of Israel. So it's a very common thing. It can be that way. And so it's absolutely not exegetically dishonest to read this as opposed to the entire earth. The entire earth does not fall under the covenant of the covenant God had with Israel, right? For instance, when this happened in Jerusalem in the year 70, and all these astronomical things we see, the Native Americans were not seeing these things, right? They were just over here doing their thing. It didn't affect them. And you see this language, we're going to talk about it in the sermon today. You see this language throughout the Old Testament, this global deconstruction language and stars falling from heaven. Oh, and that's when the Medes conquered Babylon. You know, when the Medes conquered Babylon, literally in time, they didn't see the astronomical signs like that. Neither did the Native Americans over here. It's just not what they see. And if you read, I'm going to mention this today. I encourage you to read this later. Psalm 18. It's a psalm of David of when God delivered him from the hand of Saul. And David says when God delivered him from the hand of Saul, the earth reeled and rocked and smoke went forth out of the nostrils of God, and the sun didn't give its light, and the moon didn't give its reflection. When David was delivered from the hands of Saul, the Native Americans didn't see anything going on in the sky. Right? That's just that language. And so understanding that language helps us to have a better understanding of Revelation. But this pale horse, whose name is Death, that's a wonderful name, isn't it? And then Hades, the Greek word Hades, and it's where we get hell, the Greek word Hades. Hades followed behind, and authority was given over the fourth of the earth with sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. The four judgments echo Ezekiel 14:21, where God sends his four severe judgments against Jerusalem: sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence. We literally see this in Ezekiel, and I think I have the whole passage there for you, 14:21 through 23. Those specific four things that were sent against Jerusalem in the times of Babylon. So, you know, when Rome did what Rome did to Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70, that's not the first time this has happened to Jerusalem. Because of their rampant disobedience and continually rejecting God's prophets and not following God's word, God often let them go into captivity. And the Babylonian captivity, that where Babylon conquered Israel and destroyed the temple and those things, similar language was used. Even global deconstruction language was used when Babylon conquered Israel in the past. The pestilence, Josephus records that the bodies, I said this already, the bodies of the dead were so numerous they were thrown over the city walls. And Titus was overwhelmed by the stench, and he wept, specifically calling God to witness that this was not his doing. He was proud of what he did, but he said, I'm calling God to witness that this is not our doing. We're not doing this. He didn't want that blood on him. He said, we're not doing this. But because of this, disease followed, with the unburied dead stacked inside and outside the walls. This has been the pestilence. Wild beasts. After Jerusalem's fall, the thousands of Jewish prisoners were sent to the provinces to be killed by wild beasts in the arenas. Titus staged spectacles in Caesarea Philippi and other cities where Jewish captives, not Christians, right? Jewish captives were killed by wild beasts in arenas, and they're burned and sometimes made to fight each other. But wild beasts were part of the judgment that God released on his people. So he didn't send lions and bears to attack Jerusalem, but lions and bears attacked those people when they were taken captive. We need to understand the covenant background of this. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. Y'all read those when you get home in your spare time, but these two chapters specifically spell out in detail the curses that would fall on Israel for covenant unfaithfulness. sword, famine, pestilence, and exile. The four horsemen are not, again, not some novel invention that John is seeing for the very first time, but the four horsemen were seen by Zechariah. And he writes about them in Zechariah 1 and Zechariah 6. But they are the covenant lawsuit of Moses arriving to do what the lawsuit stipulations demand. That's bringing this judgment. Let's look at verses 9 through 17 here, just one at a time. We're going to see the fifth seal in verses 9 through 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the slain for the word of God and for the witness that they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So we see here the souls under the altar, and this is the prayer of the martyrs, and it's the prayer that in a way drives the rest of the book. The golden bowls of incense that we will see, or that we did see from chapter 5, are being poured out. And they're given white robes and told to rest a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants is complete. We see that these martyrs are not forgotten. Their cry is heard, but God's timing is sovereign. So first, we note the altar imagery where blood would be sprinkled on the altar, but these souls are underneath this altar. And like the blood of a sacrifice that's poured out the base of the altar in the Levitical system. Their deaths are not meaningless casualties, but they are offerings and part of what's happening here with God judging Jerusalem. We've been seeing on Sunday mornings. We're really going to see it today, where Jesus says, you who killed the prophets, the blood from righteous Abel to Zechariah, whom you murdered in the temple, will come upon this generation. It's Abel, and it's Zechariah, and it's Jeremiah, and it's Isaiah, and it's those whom God's own people have slaughtered and murdered that are saying, God, how much longer till you avenge us of our blood? And they're told, wait just a little bit longer, right? Just a little bit longer. And they will be, it's not like a cry for deliverance, right? They're not in purgatory crying to get out of purgatory. It's nothing like that. The souls are crying, how much longer before you avenge us? And they're told, here's a white robe, wait just another minute, wait just a little bit longer as these things are taking place on Jerusalem. The sixth seal, we see cosmic shaking in verses 12 through 17. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. As the fig tree, we saw this fig tree language, we're going to see it today in the sermon too. As the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale, the sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. That's heavy language. Of course, it's the wrath of God, right? But it's the wrath of the Lamb. That's intense. I think that's intense. For the great day of their wrath has come, the one on the throne and the Lamb. Who can stand? A great earthquake, the sun darkened, the moon like blood, stars falling, the sky rolled up like a scroll, mountains and islands moved. We also see every class of society, kings, generals, rich, poor, slave, free. They all hide in caves and they cry for the mountains to fall on them, asking who can stand before the wrath of the Lamb. We must read this apocalyptically. Guys, we know a little bit about astronomy. what happens if a star falls to the earth? Like, we understand that there is, as far as we know, no star that is smaller than the earth, right? Stars are ginormous. From if what they say is accurate, the sun is a relatively small star compared to some stars that are 100 times the size of our sun. This is that apocalyptic language, that apocalyptic picture that we see. We see the same language when Babylon takes Israel or takes Jerusalem. We see the same language in the Old Testament when the Medes conquer Babylon. We see the same language when God delivers David from the hand of Saul. We see this same language over and over again, and that's what it's depicting. It's depicting in this cosmic deconstruction language, it's language about God's judgment. That's what it is everywhere else in Scripture. So we have no reason to say that it's something different here. We have no real reason to say, well, it was symbolic then, but here in Revelation, it's literally meteors falling, and it's literally every mountain has been removed, right? We have to understand the apocalyptic nature of it. If you're taking notes, I don't know if I have them in your handout or not, but Isaiah 13, Isaiah 34, Ezekiel 32, and Joel 2. That's where we see this exact language. And in every one of these instances, none of these people looked in the sky and saw those things. They didn't see those things in the sky. In every case, the language describes a world-shaking historical event, not a literal end of the physical universe. The sixth seal is the announcement that the current world order, we'd say the order of apostate Jerusalem and also of Rome, is coming down. Let's look at chapter 7. We're going to see something of an interlude here. And we're going to read about the sealed people who are sealed and the multitude. In verses 1 through, we'll get there in a second. Chapter 7, it's an interlude between the 6th and 7th seal. It answers the question raised at the end of chapter 6, who can stand, right? Who can stand before the wrath of him who's on the throne and the Lamb? Who in the world can stand before them? And the answer is given in two different visions here, in two different ways. First, we see the 144,000. After this, in verse 1, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, right? We understand the imagery here. The earth has no corners, right? It's round. The 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then, I'm not going to read them all, but you've got Judah. I'm not going to read all the text, but it's 12,000 from the tribe of Judah were sealed. And then Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And one thing to note here, one of the sons is Dan, and Dan is not mentioned here, but instead Manasseh is mentioned in his place. And the order is different. It's normally Reuben mentioned first, but here it's Judah. It's not literally, there's no reason to understand this literally, that 12,000 people from each of these 12 tribes were sealed. The number 12 represents, God's people with the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles. And then it's 12 times 1,000. It's just this multiplied number. And I'll elaborate on that as we go. But a few things to establish clearly. First, the sealing happens before the judgment falls. It's a protective covenant marking. It recalls the blood on the doorpost at Passover and the mark on the forehead in Ezekiel 9, where God marks the faithful in Jerusalem before judgment falls on the unfaithful. The sealed are not removed from this time of tribulation. They are preserved through it. The same thing in Ezekiel 9, referring to the Babylonian conquest. God seals his people and preserves them and cares for them through it. And again, the list of the tribes is unusual because it's not about literal, the 12,000 and first person man. He's like, bummer, I didn't get sealed. I want to be sealed. That's not the point that's being made here. And numbering like this that you see in the Old Testament, that when Israel was numbered like this and given the census, the numberings for each tribe, is always for war. It's always, these are the ones who are above 20. I think it's 20, 22, or what, I think it's 20, that were men who could go to war. That's how it was numbered. So you got an army here. And the point is that not one of God's people will be lost in the coming judgment. But then we see in verses 9 through 17, let's look at this like this. So let's see. In verse 4, he says, and I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe. He heard something, right? You remember earlier, he heard the voice saying the line of the tribe of Judah has overcome, or whatever the language is. He heard it. He said, I turned and saw a lamb standing as it had been slain. He heard something about a lion, turns and sees a lamb. Here he hears about the number sealed, and look in verse 9. And after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Salvation belongs to the one on the throne and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders, the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So he hears these numbers, and he turns and sees an innumerable multitude. It's these two different ways of talking about the preservation of God's people. They are standing before God's throne with palm branches praising the Lord. They were preserved through this tribulation, and they are ultimately preserved and stand before God. See, that applies to us in the fact that God does not lose a single one of his people. Not a single one. It's not as though the blood on the doorpost at the first Passover saved most of the people with the blood over the doorpost. The death angel passed through and killed some of them. Their odds were better if they had blood on their doorpost, but some of them didn't make it. If they are sealed by God with the blood on the doorpost, or as in Ezekiel 9, the mark on their forehead, or here in Revelation, sealed on their forehead, not a single one is lost. They are preserved, and they are seen standing before the throne. Let's look at verse 13 and finish out this chapter. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. And John is singing this saying, I'm not sure. I'm learning all this right now, And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. The six seals form a coherent movement. Covenant judgment is unleashed. We see in the horsemen. The martyrs cry for vindication. This is the fifth seal. The announcement goes out that the world order is falling. The sixth seal. And God's people are sealed and secure through all of it. We see in chapter 7. The seventh seal has not yet been opened, and that will come next. That's where we will pick up in chapter 8 next week. But this pattern is already established. Judgment and preservation are inseparable. If you could sum up all of Scripture in one little phrase, it would be God's glory in salvation through judgment. You can't have salvation without judgment. And God saves through judgment. God saves from judgment. God preserves through tribulation. God brings us through storms. God brings us through these things and preserves us. And we need to rest in the God who preserves. We need to trust in the God who preserves. The wrath of the Lamb falls on the covenant-breaking world. And the covenant-keeping people are held in his hand. That's where we see a global implication of this. God will judge the world. Just because we're looking at this and seeing it clearly fit in that first century context, there's a time when God will judge the living and the dead. There's a time when there will be a resurrection of the just and the unjust. There's a time when we'll see at the end of Revelation, the books are open, the dead are raised, those who are in the sea, those who are in hell, everyone is raised and will stand before God in judgment. That will happen to every one of us. That's just not what we're seeing here. But the fact of the matter still stands that there is judgment, there is wrath of the Lamb, there is the preservation, there is the vindication where God will vindicate us as we're standing up for the truth and being persecuted, as we're witnessing to people and they're throwing it back in our face, as we are standing up for the rights of the unborn and they're slaughtering the unborn, right? God will vindicate us and God will destroy those who do not come to trust in him and be secure in him. So that judgment is still there. I think I've got on your notes some cross references at the bottom. We referenced all of these, and you can probably find Josephus' works. You can probably find it for free somewhere online. You can probably read the whole thing. The book is like this thick, though. It's a giant book. But man, if you read Josephus alongside Revelation and Matthew 24 and Matthew 13 and Luke 21, good grief, you're reading almost the same thing a lot of times. So it's really neat that we have